Okay, in the last lesson, we covered truth functional truth and truth functional falsity. Here we're going to cover now when the case where a sentence is truth functionally indeterminate. Okay, so let's look at an example. So consider the sentence, if A, then if B, then A. And let's compare this sentence to another sentence that might look fairly similar. So we'll do that sentence versus another sentence where we have if A, then B, and if this, let me put a little space there, if this component, then A. Okay, so these sentences look quite similar, right? I mean, the only difference really here is where the parentheses are. But this is actually going to be really important because the truth conditions of this sentence are going to be very different than this one, depending on the order in which you evaluate depending on, well, because the truth conditions are actually different, and we'll see how that comes up when we actually do the truth table. So let's look at the first one, right? We have, we're going to use the sentence, this one right here. So if A, then if B, then A. So there's two sentence letters that we're interested in, and let me just write this out here. Oh, sorry. This one in parentheses B, A. There. Okay. So remember, because we have two atomic sentences here, we're going to need 4 rows, right? Because there's going to be 4 different possible combinations. One where A is true and B is true. Another scenario we have that A is true but B is false. Another scenario where we have A is false and B is true. And then the scenario where both of them are false. Oh, sorry. Okay, so these are the different truth value assignments that we have to consider. And so if we just copy that under here, in the first case we have both that A are true. Then here we have it that A is true but B is false. Here we have it that A is false but B is true. And here we have it that both A is false and B is false. Okay, so we've copied the truth values under the atomic sentences given the truth assignment that we're looking at, right? Remember, the truth assignment is always the row that we're interested in. So we're looking at the scenario in this first row where A is true and B is true. And so here's where the difference comes between this sentence and this sentence. The parentheses tell us where we have to look to do our first evaluation. So here we don't evaluate this conditional first, we evaluate this material conditional first. Because remember, the rule is always the innermost truth functional connective is the one you evaluate first. So this is the one we're going to look at first. And so here what we have is the case that the antecedent, in this case B, is true and the consequent is false. And if you remember the truth table for the material conditional, that means that this comes out true. Similarly for the second row, so here we have the antecedent is false, and if you remember the truth table for the material conditional, whenever the antecedent is false, the whole conditional comes out true. Here we have it that the antecedent B is true, but the consequent is false. And the truth table for material conditional says that that's a scenario where the compound sentence, so this whole truth functional, the material conditional, sorry, is false. And in this last scenario, we again have it that the antecedent is false here, and so this automatically comes out true. Okay, now that we've evaluated this truth functional connective, then we can go over to this material conditional here and look at that one. And the truth values that we're going to look at to evaluate the material conditional here is the one under A, so what appears on the left side, and the component that appears on the right. Now the component that's on the right isn't an atomic sentence, right? This is another compound sentence of SL. And so we don't look at the truth values of B here or the truth values of A. What we look at is right here, right? We always look at what the main connective is of the complex sentence. So when we're evaluating this material conditional, we're not going to be looking at A or B, we're going to be looking at the evaluation we gave when the truth values that we assigned to the material conditional in this column. So when we have, so let's do that. So we have that A under this truth value assignment is true, and the consequent, which is this whole complex sentence, is also true right here. So we know that given the truth table for material conditional, this sentence is true. And so what about under this truth value assignment? Well, we have it that A is true, right? So the antecedent of this material conditional is true. And when we look over here, the consequent, right, which is this complex sentence, is also true. So we assign true to this truth value assignment as well. And so here's a neat little trick. So the antecedent here, which is just A, is false under these two scenarios. And given the way the material conditional is defined, it always comes out true whenever the antecedent is false. So whenever the thing on the left-hand side of the material conditional is false, you know the whole thing's going to come out false. You don't even have to check what the consequent is. So that's a neat little trick to remember about the material conditional. Whenever the antecedent is false, right? So whenever the thing on the left-hand side is false, the whole thing comes, the whole material conditional, right? So this whole complex sentence comes out true right away. And so if you remember, for our definition of truth functional truth, that meets this definition, right? Under every truth value assignment, this whole sentence is always true. And that's just what our definition of truth functional truth is. So this sentence is truth functionally true. But let's look at this sentence right here. So let me just copy this table and be efficient. So here, instead of having the parentheses around the second conditional, we're going to have it around the first one. And actually, let me just quickly make a note here that says that. So is truth functionally true? Okay, but now we're looking at a different sentence, right? Where the parentheses are around the first material conditional. And let me actually be efficient here just by deleting these. So just as before, what I'm leaving left over is the truth values of the atomic sentences given the truth assignment over here, right? So A is true, B is true, and A is true under this a truth value assignment. But A is true and B is false under this truth value assignment, and so on. Okay, so but rather than evaluating this material conditional first, the rule always is look at the innermost truth functional connective. And in this case, that's this first material conditional. So let's evaluate the connective here. So we know that the antecedent and the consequent are both true, so the whole complex sentence comes out true. Here we have the antecedent, A, is true, but the consequent is false. So we know that the connective is, the complex sentence is then false. And remember the trick that I just told you about, whenever the antecedent, right, so whenever the left-hand component of the material conditional is false, the whole thing comes out true, given the truth table for the material conditional. So here A is false and A is false, so we know that the material conditional is going to be true in both those cases. So now let's go and evaluate this material conditional. So remember, what we're going to be looking at here are the left component and the right component. And unlike in the last scenario where we had the right component being a complex sentence and the left component, namely the antecedent, being an atomic sentence, here the antecedent is a complex component and the consequent is an atomic sentence. So that means that when we're going to evaluate this material conditional, we're not going to look at this truth value here under B or this truth value here under A. We're going to look at the truth value that we've given for the complex sentence, which is under the main connective of that sentence. So let's evaluate this material conditional right here. We have it that the antecedent, which is this complex sentence, is true and the consequent is also true. So we know that this material conditional will then get assigned true. In the second scenario, in the second truth value assignment, we have it that the antecedent, namely this complex sentence, is false. So by the trick that I told you about before, whenever the antecedent is false, the whole thing comes out true right away. Okay, so let's look here. We have it that the antecedent is true and the consequent, namely A, is false. And given the truth table for material conditional, that means that this sentence is now false under this truth value assignment. Okay, and lastly, we'll look at the last truth value assignment. So here, the antecedent, again, is true, right? So we're looking at this whole complex sentence. That's true, and again, the consequent here, namely A, is false, and so we know that's a scenario where, given the definition of the semantics for the truth conditional, the whole thing comes out false, sorry, not true. So notice now that unlike in the previous case where under every truth value assignment the whole sentence was true, here on some truth value assignments the complex sentence is true, but under other truth value assignments it is false. So this is what we call truth functional indeterminacy. In other words, this sentence, let me just copy it from here. So this sentence here is truth functionally indeterminate. And the definition of indeterminacy is just that it's not truth functionally true or truth functionally false. In other words, so P is truth functionally indeterminate if and only if P is neither truth functionally true nor truth functionally false. Okay, so that covers now truth functional truth, truth functional falsity, and truth functional indeterminacy.